Hello and welcome back to HEMAFightBreakdowns. Today I'm going to be breaking down the finals match between Mikolaj and Bohdan in Tyrnhaw 2024's Longsword Finals. Now, I'm going to cover this fight like it's any other fight because at the end of the day, it is a really good fight with some interesting adaptations and some really good fencing. However, I can already tell when I watched this the first time that a lot of people are going to be really upset about some of the things that they see here, particularly the rules and particularly the way that the fencers use those rules to fight each other. And I want to make it clear that I don't really want to make this about that until we get to a certain point. So I'm going to make you a little bit of a deal. I'm going to go through this fight completely as normal until we get to what I think is the pivotal demonstration in an exchange that is going to encapsulate what people do and do not like about this kind of fencing and this kind of rule set. And then we're going to talk about it. But until then, we're just going to cover this like normal. So we're going to move on to the first exchange right now. So for our first exchange, I do want to make sure I start off by saying this, that actually the ticker on the bottom of the video is completely reversed. The fighter in red is actually on the right and not the left. So that is Mikolaj on the left and Bohdan on the right. Yes, Bohdan does have a blue thing hanging off of his mask. He's still the red fighter. So just clearing that up. However, for this exchange, what we see is a pretty interesting game of footwork going on here. Both fighters are being very cagey and they're trying to maintain their distance and trying to wait for that one opportunity where one fencer can commit with something really big, perhaps a really big thrust or a really big shot to the hands or the head, at which point they will be able to parry riposte it. And that is exactly what we see here. We see Bohdan go in really hard with a thrust from the outside line. He gets parried off, and Mikolaj does his best to try to throw a parry riposte in there, but it looks like he gets tangled up on Bohdan's crossguard as they both sort of mash together and try to get the best of the touches in the afterblow. I believe after there was a little bit of video review that they decided that there was no points accumulated in this particular shot, and I can definitely understand why. Immediately after that parry riposte happens, it gets very messy, very blurry, and it doesn't look to me like either fighter throws anything of significance that would be counted for a point. So I agree with their ruling that nothing really happened here. So our next exchange is another pretty long one, and it features, again, a lot of footwork games where both fencers are outside of distance and they're trying to find a way to move into measure with some kind of threatening action, at which point they want to see whether or not their opponent stays still or moves backwards, at which point the exchange kind of resets. And this happens a bunch of times. However, there are some things that are telegraphed by each fighter that can tell you a little bit about their mindset and what kinds of thing they were looking to go for. Mikolaj, again on the left, clearly is looking to try to bait his opponent into going for a very big parry and waiting for that opening where he can throw either a really, really strong ballistic thrust or some kind of hand cut. However, Bohdan, again on the right, is lowering his guard and presenting an open target on his head and chest, essentially trying to bait Mikolaj into throwing that big ballistic thrust, which it looks like he was trying to set up. So, instantly upon seeing this, Mikolaj tries to adapt his game a little bit and tries to go for a little bit of a hand shot. Since Bohdan is keeping his hands low, it's obvious that the first thing he's going to want to try to do is parry up and to the side to try to deflect anything that's coming towards his head or chest, and as such, he will be open to a hand shot from underneath if that happens. However, when Mikolaj goes for this little hand shot, Bohdan moves so far out of range that it's not worth trying to do, but he does give him that little piece of information. Now, upon seeing this, what Bohdan now knows is that Mikolaj is trying to get around the fact that he's baiting his chest and head, and he's only going to throw shallow targets because he doesn't believe that he can make it in time into that open target to successfully get a clean point. So, Bohdan counter-adapts and realizes that Mikolaj is now going to play pretty defensively and he's going to be going for shallow targets. So it is his opportunity to use the exact same adaptation that Mikolaj was going to try against him. So he comes forward with a big lunge that looks like he's going to try to go into a deep target. Mikolaj throws the appropriate parry, but finds that he just gets hit right on the bottom of the hands and doesn't respond very quickly afterwards, rewarding Bohdan with a clean point. Now, I know I said I was going to wait until the pivotal moment, and this is not it. But this is obviously something that a lot of people don't really like about this kind of fencing. They don't like really big, strong undercuts because they might see it as suicidal. However, I would point out that A, there was only one hit. Mikolaj did not respond. And more importantly, even if he had, there was actually a pretty decent chance for Bohdan to be able to cover his openings even afterwards, because just how much time there was after he landed the hit toward parrying. This is something that probably would get you a point in virtually every tournament rule set across the country and across the world. So if you're going to complain about something, don't complain about this one. Now, our next exchange is a really short one, but it does show a really smart fencing adaptation from Bohdan here. Now, one thing I've talked about in the past is that there's a kind of psychological thing that goes on in a fighter's mind, which is that when they get hit by something, they're thinking about it really hard and they're thinking it might be really, really useful. And so there's a pattern almost that a lot of people across all combat sports do, which is when they get hit by something, they have this instinct to throw it right back at their opponent. Almost like a kind of one-up gamesmanship kind of thing, where they say, oh, you hit me with that, well, I want to hit you with that right back so that you feel just as bad as I do. And if you know that it's coming, there's a really simple thing you can do, which is just prepare for what you just threw to come right back at you, and you'll have the perfect parry riposte almost every single time. That's what happens here. Mikolaj goes in for that same hand cut. You see he takes 3, 4, 5 steps forward, and he still is not in the proper range in order to reach this target, at which point after he misses his undercut to the hands, Bohdan simply throws another one straight across the side into Mikolaj's right arm and lands a nice clean point. Really good demonstration of how if you're in your opponent's head, you can easily predict what they might be doing next. And if you can do that, you can always select the perfect technique every single time and come out with some very clean fencing. Our next exchange is another long one, but one where we see another really intelligent adaptation from Bohdan here, but not necessarily in the way that a lot of people would consider super cool or super HEMA related, because his adaptation is one in which he knows he's 3 points up in a system where, at least so far, it appears you can only get 1 point, and that's a really commanding lead. So if there was ever a time to switch to defense mode, it would be now. In this particular case, it doesn't seem to work out for him, however, because Mikolaj comes in with a very large lunging attack, which seems to tickle the hand of Bohdan a little bit, at which point Bohdan tries to throw a single time parry riposte counterattack directly into the elbow, which normally I also wouldn't have think landed very well, except that it manages to remove the elbow protection of Mikolaj with the strike. So from other tournament perspectives, you might call this a kind of double. Both people come forward, they both hit each other in the hands. Although in this rule set, there was attack priority, meaning that because Mikolaj was the one coming forward, it was Bohdan's obligation to parry, and because he didn't do that, Mikolaj is the one who gets the point. And again, this is not the pivotal moment, but this is another thing that people really don't like in the world of HEMA. They don't like attack priority because they think it turns into suicidal fencing. And I find that ironic because in this particular exchange, it was attack priority that removed the instinct to be suicidal. It punished Bohdan for throwing an attack rather than a parry, and actually made the incentive of this exchange to be very not suicidal. But we're not really there yet, so let's continue to watch some exchanges. So for this next exchange, we see a little bit of a reversal of tactics. Up until now, Bohdan has been in the lower guards, looking to sweep his parries across the middle and bait Mikolaj into throwing a ballistic thrust. But now we see Mikolaj standing in those low guards, looking to sweep across the middle and trying to bait Bohdan into the thrust. And he does get that thrust. However, he does not manage to get the parry riposte on this. And in my opinion, that is because Bohdan did a very smart thing and changed his target selection. Most of the time, when somebody throws a thrust, they are aiming for this center line straight down the middle. Your nose, your chin, your neck, your solar plexus. And the reason for that is that it gives you a really good area to shoot for that A, is at the extension of your arms and your shoulders, which means it's your longest reach. And also because there's all this body to try to deflect out of. So they don't necessarily know which side of the blade you're going to be on. And if they have to sweep you off, they have to push you from here all the way off to the side. And that's just a lot of real estate. So it can work out very well. However, when your opponent is standing in a guard where they clearly intend to sweep all the way across their body, you might think it advantageous to aim for something over here. But at the same time, you recognize that they are pre-programmed for this parry that they're going to do. So maybe this is still going to end up getting parried. So instead, you aim for over here. And the idea is not to be on the inside of that sweeping parry, but to be on the outside of it, hoping that they completely whiff and hit nothing but air, and ensure that by the time they get all the way over here with their parry, there's absolutely no chance that they can get all the way to the other side to defend the spot that you actually attacked. That is what I think happens here, and that is what I think Bohdan was intending to do, and he does get it. He lands that thrust straight to the bicep, it looks like, and he manages to get another clean point. So this is the one. This is the exchange that I was talking about since the beginning, and the one that I think is going to get the most people the most mad. And I would be lying if I said I didn't include myself in that category somewhat. So here's the exchange. There is a little bit of a one-handed thrust attempt from Bohdan. It gets parried off to the side. Mikolaj tries to chase him down, but he can't quite close the distance, and they kind of reset. At which point, Bohdan tries the exact same thing that he had gotten a point off of a while ago, where he does a big lunging step forward, attempting to get Mikolaj on the defensive, and throws a big undercut straight to the bottom of the hands. And he lands it. However, in a hard read, Mikolaj realizes that this is exactly what's happening, and instead throws a thrust directly to his chest and plants it so hard that he basically bends his sword in a 90-degree angle. Bohdan, in this instance, came forward with a massive lunge, threw an attack that had zero chance of really being defended, though that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. He landed his attack, and he got absolutely skewered. And in virtually every other tournament across the world, this would result in some points for Mikolaj. However, due to the attack priority that we talked about earlier, this resulted in points for Bohdan. And this is where we have a little bit of an issue, where I think a lot of people are going to watch this particular exchange and this particular fight and say, this is bad fencing, or more importantly, that this is the kind of fencing that's going to ruin HEMA. Now, I've made videos about this in the past, and I think saying it's going to ruin HEMA is nothing short of absolutely dramatic and over the top, and it's just not true. However, there is something to point out here, which is that this tournament clearly has rules that exist on an extreme of what a lot of people think of as Olympic fencing style judging and rule set. And they're not exactly wrong about that. I myself have fenced over attack priority rule sets, and I think that there's actually some pretty key differences in this particular rule set that are worth pointing out that are going to maybe change your opinion a little bit about whether or not this is going to ruin HEMA or whether or not this is really a bad rule set overall. And the first being that a lot of people love to complain about afterblows. And what I don't think a lot of people understand is that there is absolutely, fundamentally, no difference whatsoever between an afterblow, a double, and a counter attack. In attack priority, a counterattack is defined as any attack that you throw that isn't the first. And if you throw it second, if you ain't first, you're last. And in attack priority, you don't get your points. However, in an afterblow rule set, you can. You can, not just based on whether or not you threw your counterattack or your afterblow or your double intention, in a reasonable enough time. Most people consider this based on tempo. Tempo being basically a measure of time, but really a measure of intention. If you come forward, your intent is to attack me. And what an afterblow rule set essentially says is, just like with what Mikolaj does here, you can intend to parry, or you can intend to counterattack. And based on the difference of the target that you land, you can theoretically get some points in the wash. You can get a big stab to the chest or head and cancel out the fact that you got hit in the hands, and more importantly, that you, theoretically, ignored the intention of your opponent to hit you and decided to hit them back instead. Now, the question becomes, what do you want to see? What do you want to have happen in your fencing? Because plenty of people will line up and down the street telling you that double fencing or doubly fencing or afterblow fencing is suicidal, it's silly, it's whack, fuck, stick, smash, whatever weird insult they come up with. It's rhino sex. I've heard all kinds of garbage. But they'll still look at something like this and go, oh, but this is horrible. You can't do that. That was suicidal fencing. You can't have it both ways. You have to pick one. You have to either give people the ability to throw a suicidal attack as a counterattack and ignore their opponent's intention, or you have to give priority to the intention of the person who attacked first. You have no other option. You either force somebody to parry and give them the benefit of that parry, or you allow them to not parry. And in my opinion, I prefer the afterblow rule set. I just prefer it to have a really, really tight tempo. In my opinion, in my rule set, in my head, this particular exchange would have gone and given 1 point to Mikolaj because despite the fact that he did decide to ignore the attack of his opponent, his decision to throw a attack that was worth more points, theoretically, was a tactical and interesting decision that makes the game of the fight much more pleasant to watch, much more pleasant to fight under. And when we're talking about making the rule set of HEMA something that we want it to be, these are the kinds of conversations that we have to have. I said it before, and I'll say it again, I do not care whatsoever for the concept of martial validity. I don't care who dies in this exchange. I don't care if that thrust would have maybe gone through your shoulder and there's no vital organs there, or maybe that undercut would have chopped his hand off and he dropped his sword. I don't care. These are not the parameters that you can use to make rules, because the rules that you make will never make sense, they'll never be fun, and they're never going to result in really interesting competition. Those are the parameters that you need to have, and in my opinion, this is a rather uninteresting exchange. It's not uninteresting because someone was suicidal. It's not uninteresting because it had an Olympic fencing rule set. It's uninteresting because a tactical decision was made by Mikolaj that was not rewarded, that in my opinion should be. Now, you can have a different opinion. That's perfectly fine. One of the things that makes HEMA great is that there are so many different rule sets that you can fight under that will prioritize different things. But if you don't even understand on a conceptual level the kinds of things that you're going for and trying to bring out in the rule sets that you create, well, you're going to end up getting fencing that you don't like at your own tournament. So, if you want a conclusion to take from this, take it from here. Look at this exchange and decide with your rule set what you want the result to be. But also keep in mind all the other exchanges that happened in this fight. These are not bad fighters. To call this bad fencing would not only be wrong, but a critical failure in your own ability to judge the fencing of others and to make rule sets that brings out the kind of fencing that you want. All right, that's it. I'm off the soapbox now. I'm not going to finish reviewing this fight because that's probably going to be half of the video, my rant. And most importantly, that, at least in my opinion, this is a pretty one-sided one. And there's not a lot of really interesting adaptations that happen from now on. But I am going to review more fights like this one, and I'm going to have another video out on Thursday. So if you want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you then.